Matt, let me ask you what you think about this, because you've written so much about the decline of the news business, and you've made it clear you're not saying that it was perfect in the past, but that it's definitely lost that core of principle of objectivity. And you even make the case that objective journalism was a business model, that it wasn't even necessarily noble. You don't even hold it up in that way. Um, but with the death of Kissinger this week, we did a little piece on it through the lens of some of Hitchens' last words about Kissinger. And I said, and we're almost exactly the same age. So you probably remember this from when you were a child. I remember when Kissinger was a pop star. Like there was a giant size Muhammad Ali versus Superman boxing comic book. And they had in the front row were all these celebrities of that era, and Kissinger was in that. Like that even for a children's comic book, they threw Kissinger in.
Right.
So
Yeah.
was the news media always essentially this bad in a certain sense? I mean, they definitely pumped up Kissinger as a rock star. Joe Namath and Jacqueline Onassis, and he was in that pantheon of just really hip, cool, chic figures that you were supposed to love, and he was a monster.
Well, that's true, but he was a product of that era that we started to see this after World War II, when there was this movement toward, and Thomas Frank writes about this in his book, The People Know, that we got away from the idea of popular rule, programs done for the general population, and instead, let's just put the machinery of government in the hands of the best and the brightest, right? This like enlightened managerial class, that became the new ideal. And Kissinger, for a lot of people, symbolized that system. He was the brilliant academic who, could keep it all in his head. And for a lot of a certain kind of journalist, for those folks, they adored everything about him, his accent,
Right. His witticisms.
He did say some funny things. I mean, wasn't he the one who said the politics in academia are so vicious because the stakes are so low? Like he was capable of some very good one-liners, and as you know, journalists can have their pants charmed off rather quickly by anybody with an intellect over like a B plus. And he was a smart guy, and they loved him. But my counter to you would be that Cy Hirsch was also a rock star, and his whole raison d'etre was to expose Henry Kissinger as a monster. He wrote that book, The Price of Power, that was a #1 bestseller, and talked about how Kissinger, had the Secret Services monitoring all the phone traffic in Washington and giving him daily updates or weekly updates on anything anybody said about him, because he was such a narcissist. So yes, the press was always terrible. They were always sycophantic. I think there was a model for the mass media sycophant that became kind of institutionalized, especially in the Kennedy years forward. But we did always have this other thriving thing in journalism that was kind of oppositional, and that's what's disappeared. In the same way that the kind of Paul Wellstone, Russ Feingold type of liberal has disappeared from the caucus in the Democratic Party. They're just not there anymore, right? So that would be my answer. I don't know. What's your take on that?
I think you're right, but I also think, okay, so they killed this Cy Hirsch monster, right? By basically pulling all the Cy Hirsches out of the mainstream media, right? And marginalizing all of those kinds of voices. This is really the battle that I think you're stuck in the middle of, for good or for ill. The internet has reinvigorated those voices and arguably made them more powerful and more pervasive than ever before. It is terrifying to them that every figure that they speak against, like Joe Rogan, only gets more popular.
Right.
So they are trying to find a way to develop a legal framework by which to eliminate those voices, as they had arguably eliminated them for a while. They got rid of that.
I think that's exactly right. Like you could even go back and pinpoint it. It starts with the Arab Spring, Occupy, Tea Party. They already started the counter movements then, but as soon as Brexit and Trump happened, that's suddenly there's money for the Global Engagement Center. There's the Department of Defense is pouring money into these weird domestic speech monitoring programs. Yeah, I think that's basically the plot. Is they had systematically kicked the noisome, troublesome investigative journalists out of the system, but the internet is so powerful that you don't even need to be, in a corporate institution anymore. So now they have to just close out every distribution system possible, and they're doing it, and that's why you have to go out kicking and screaming. I mean, and raising a fuss, and
well, and opening up your own shop. I mean, you were talking about this last time you were on, how, the irony is that, as much as they like to hand wring and pearl clutch, and even talk down to the independent journalists, like Substacker is like a dirty word. He's got a Substack. But you went to Substack. Greenwald initially went to Substack. Now he's on Locals. Same thing, though, free speech, writing, multimedia platform. Cy Hirsch is on Substack now. And the ultimate irony is this, is it, like, as they've tried to box, pardon me, the sort of scrappy independent journalist out of the business, you said last time, and I think you're right, it's actually easier now to make a living as a journalist than it was back then, because you can do it on your own and build a following based on the strength of your work. If there's a big if, and this is what they're trying to crack down on, if there is actually a free and open internet.
Right, and I've already seen a huge difference even since the last time that we, have talked. All they have to do is limit the ability for things to be seen, change the algorithms, make it harder for the mass audience to see you. And, the great thing about Substack is that they can't do that, right? Because it's email. But the problem is the marketing. You still have to market somehow, right? And if you can't do it on X or Twitter, it becomes very, very difficult.
Please clap.